Jake Callan, a war-worn veteran with nothing left but the breath of his infant twins against his chest, thought the cold floor of an empty hall was the safest place he could offer them. But when Evelyn Marlowe, a woman of wealth and secrets, stepped into the dim light and saw them, something in her froze. Why would Millionaire risk her quiet, guarded life for a man she barely knew and two fragile lives that weren't hers to keep? If the stories have found family, second chances, and the quiet moments that change everything. Subscribe for more heartfelt tales, because the next story might just be the one you carry with you. The rain had a weight to it that night, each drop carrying the sound of faraway things, the kind that only came back to you in dreams. Through the fog windows of Community Hall, a pale light hummed, holding its own against the dark. Jake Callan lay on the floor, knees bent, one arm curved protectively around the warm bundle on his chest. The twins breathed in tandem, tiny chests rising and falling against the faded cotton of his shirt. A second blanket, worn thin, was spread across all three of them. The floor under him was hard, the mat too thin, but he had chosen the spot near the heater, so they would keep their warmth through the night. The hum of the old space heater filled the silence, interrupted now and then by the restless whimper of one of the babies. Jake would shift, adjust, murmur low until the sound faded. His voice was steady, the way it had been in sandstorms and barracks, over desert radios and under jungle canopies. Only now it belonged to no one but them. Outside, the rain slid off the eaves and pooled in the cracks of the broken pavement. Street lamps spilled weak circles of amber onto the wet, empty street. Evelyn Marlowe hadn't planned on coming. She didn't need to. She had employees for that, coordinators who restocked the hall, who signed the receipts, who made sure the donations from her foundation reached the ones who needed them. But sometimes, when the glass walls of her penthouse felt too tight and her own reflection stared back too clearly, she found herself here. She stepped inside without a sound, the sharp scent of wet wool and rain following her. The hall's light softened her silhouette, the tailored coat, the fine leather gloves, the pearl gray scarf. She had almost turned to leave when she saw him, a man on the floor, head resting back against the wall. His boots were worn down at the heels, his canvas jacket patched at the elbow. There was a stillness to him, but not the kind born of sleep. It was a soldier's stillness, the weight evenly set, one hand free even in rest. Her eyes traveled to what lay across him. Two tiny faces, half hidden in folds of mismatched blankets, their cheeks flushed with heat, their fists curled into the fabric of his shirt. They were pressed so close she could feel the heat of them even from here. She froze. It wasn't pity, though some part of her knew. She might have called it that years ago. It was something older, stranger, a pull toward memory that still woke her in the nights. The memory of her own child, smaller than these, whom she had only held for hours before the world took him away. Jake stirred, his lashes lifting to reveal eyes the color of dark amber in low light. He didn't jolt or startle. He simply took her in, his gaze steady, unreadable. "You here for something?" His voice was low, rough with the edges of too many sleepless nights. Evelyn stepped forward, the click of her heels sounding louder than she intended on the wood floor. "I came to check the supply inventory," she said, her words even, her gaze caught on the bundle in his arms. "You're not staying here permanently, are you?" He shifted slightly, careful not to disturb the twins. "Just until they've got no more rain in the forecast. Place where it has a roof that leaks worse than this one." The babies stirred. One gave a thin cry. Without breaking their gaze, Jake adjusted the smaller of the two so her cheek rested higher on his collarbone, his large hand covering her back almost completely. The cry quieted. Evelyn felt something in her chest tighten, not from the sound, but from the way he moved. There was no performance to it, no expectation of witness. It was an instinct, and it was absolute. "Where's their mother?" she asked before she could stop herself. A shadow passed behind his eyes, quick but unmistakable. "Not here." The heater's hum grew louder in the space that followed. Evelyn realized she was still standing in the doorway, dripping rainwater onto the floor. She took another step in, unbuttoning her coat. The hall was nearly empty. Just a heater, a folding table stacked with cardboard boxes, a row of metal chairs along one wall. On the table, a formula tin with its paper label curling at the edges. 2 glass bottles, one half filled with cooled milk. Beside them, a battered military duffel, the stitching frayed along the zipper. She moved toward the table. "You need more formula," she said, more to herself than to him. Jake didn't answer. His head had tilted back slightly again, his eyes half-lidded but still on her, as if gauging why she was really there. "You don't have to stay on the floor," she added, nodding toward the cot folded in the corner. "They'd be colder there," he said simply. Evelyn's hand hesitated on the edge of a box. She wanted to ask him what branch he had served in. She could see it in his posture, his hands, the quiet in his eyes. She wanted to ask how he'd come here, why no one else was helping him, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she found herself lowering into one of the metal chairs, setting her coat across her lap. The rain outside deepened, rattling faintly against the windows. For a long time they said nothing. The heater hummed. The babies breathed. When one of the twins gave a soft, hiccuping cry, Jake lifted a bottle from the table without shifting his gaze from them. He tested the milk on his wrist, then coaxed the nipple to the baby's mouth. Evelyn watched the way his hand steadied the bottle, the way his thumb brushed absently along the baby's temple as she drank. It felt intrusive to keep watching, but she didn't look away. When the baby had finished, Jake eased her back into the crook of his arm. The other twin stirred, and he began the ritual again, his movements quiet and practiced. By the time both were sleeping again, the rain had softened into a steady whisper. Evelyn stood, her coat over her arm. "I'll make sure more supplies get here tomorrow." Jake only nodded. She was halfway to the door when she turned. "What's your name?" He hesitated. "Jake Callan." Her mouth shaped a nod she didn't quite finish. "Evelyn," she said. She didn't add her last name. He didn't ask for it. The air outside was cold, the rain smelling faintly to sea even this far inland. As she walked to her car, she glanced once through the hall's window. Jake was still in the same place, his head bent slightly toward the sleeping twins, one hand resting over both of them. She carried the image with her into the night, and for reasons she couldn't name yet, she knew she wouldn't be able to put it down. The morning came slowly, as if even the light had to work harder to reach this side of the city. Through the grimy windows, it spilled in muted gold, landing on the dusty floorboards and the heap of blankets in the corner, where Jake Callan was already awake. He was kneeling, bare feet on the cold floor, rolling a fresh cloth diaper with the precision of someone who'd folded parachutes. One of the twins, the smaller girl, gurgled against the sound of paper crinkling under the mat. The other lay in a makeshift bassinet, a battered laundry basket padded with an old quilt, watching him with eyes the color of dusk. The air was heavy with the mingled sense of warm formula, clean linen, and the faint metallic tang of rain, still clinging to the air from the night before. Jake's movements were quiet, deliberate, no wasted energy. His lips moved with low words only the baby could hear. Evelyn Marlowe stood in the doorway, holding a cardboard box against her hip. She thought she could set the supplies down and leave without disturbing them, but the sight stopped her. There was something about the way he worked, not hurried, not distracted, that made the rest of the world seem louder by comparison. She cleared her throat. "You're up early." Jake glanced over his shoulder, his gaze meeting hers without any shift in his expression. "They don't wait for the sun." The corner of her mouth twitched, not quite a smile. She set the box on the table and slipped off her coat. Today it was a cream wool, soft enough to disappear into shadows. She looked out of place here, but she didn't seem to notice. Inside the box were tins of formula, packs of diapers, 2 small jars of baby lotion, and a folded fleece blanket in pale yellow. She pulled it out and handed it to him. "New," she said simply. His eyes flicked to it, then back to her. "Appreciate it." He draped it over the smaller twin before she could stir from her half-sleep. For a moment, Evelyn just stood there, watching the way his large hands moved with such care and almost incongruous gentleness for someone built like him. "Have you been here long?" she asked. "Couple weeks. Off and on." "And before that?" "Does it matter?" The words weren't sharp, but they were firm. She looked away, tracing a finger along the edge of the table. "I suppose not." I'm just trying to understand. You don't have to, he said, and his tone wasn't unkind. The baby in the bassinet gave a soft cry, and Jake scooped her up without thinking, cradling her into the crook of his arm. His gaze softened in a way Evelyn suspected he didn't know she could see. I didn't know you came here in person, he said after a beat. She raised an eyebrow. And you know who I am? I've seen your name on the boxes. Then you know this isn't my usual place, she said. I usually work behind the scenes. He nodded once, as if that explained enough. A knock at the door broke the stillness. Evelyn turned as a man in a pressed shirt and a messenger bag stepped in, shaking rain from his shoulders. He carried a clipboard and the particular kind of polite authority that comes with bureaucracy. Mr. Callan? He asked, eyes moving from Jake to the twins. I'm from social services. Just a routine visit. Jake's shoulders shifted, barely perceptible, but Evelyn saw it. The man glanced around the hall, noting the thin mats, the worn bottles on the table. You've been doing this on your own? Jake's jaw worked once before he answered. Yes. You know it's not ideal, especially for infants this young. We can arrange for temporary care until you're... No. The word was calm, but it landed heavy. Evelyn stepped forward before the man could continue. They're warm. Federal clean, she said, her voice even but edged with something harder. I'd call that better than most. The social worker gave her a brief, tight smile, as if to acknowledge her presence but not her authority. We'll still need to follow up. He left a card on the table before stepping back into the rain. The door shut, and for a moment, the only sound was the twins breathing. Evelyn glanced at Jake. They're not wrong, you know. This place, it's not meant for more than a night or two. I know. He didn't look at her when he said it. She hesitated. Then, I have a cottage. It's empty, warm. You could use it until you find somewhere permanent. His head came up slowly. Why? For them, she said simply. He studied her, searching for the angle. I don't take charity. It's not charity. It's use what's there instead of letting it rot. His gaze flicked to the twins, then back to her. And what do you get out of it? Evelyn didn't answer right away. She was thinking of a nursery that had never been used, of a crib still folded in storage, of the way silence had grown louder in her home with each passing year. Nothing I can name. Jake didn't agree, but he didn't refuse either. Not then. The rain began again, a light patter against the windows. He looked toward the bassinet, then back at her. If it's for them, I'll take it. For now. She nodded. For now. As he gathered their few things, she noticed a limp in his step, subtle but there. He carried the twins with a balance that adjusted for it, never letting it jar them. She said nothing, but the image lodged itself in her mind. A man carrying more than he'd admit, still steady enough to keep two small lives safe. When they stepped out into the daylight, it wasn't much brighter than the night before. The air smelled of wet asphalt and early spring. Evelyn unlocked her car and held the door open. Jake adjusted the blankets over the twins, his hands as careful as if he were setting down glass. As they drove, she found herself watching him in the reflection of the window, his eyes on the road, his posture easy but alert. Not once did his hand leave the edge of the blanket beside him, and for the first time in years, Evelyn felt the faintest stirrings of something she hadn't let herself touch. Not hope, exactly. Something quieter. Something that might grow if she wasn't careful. The road to the cottage wound through wet fields and low, bare trees, their branches black against a sky the color of pewter. Rain clung to the edges of the windshield, blurring the world into strokes of gray and silver. Evelyn turned the car onto the gravel drive. The cottage came into view, small single-story, its slate roof darkened with damp, smoke curling from the chimney. The gate sagged a little on its hinges. Beyond it, the garden lay quiet under a layer of moss and rainwater. Jake stepped out first, balancing the twins in their blankets. He paused on the threshold, as if measuring the space before he entered. Inside, the air was warmer than he expected, faint with the smell of wood smoke and cedar. The living room was modest. 2 worn armchairs, a low table, bookshelves lined with titles that had sat undisturbed for years. A quilt draped over the back of the couch looked like it had been folded and refolded in the same place for decades. Evelyn stood by the doorway, her gloves still in hand. "It's not much," she said, though there was a softness in her tone. "But it's safe." Jake didn't answer. He was looking at the fireplace, the slow, steady flame in the grate. He lowered the twins onto the couch, arranging them so they were facing each other, their tiny fists twitching in sleep. She set a basket of groceries on the counter, fresh bread, jars of soup, a tin of cocoa, and watched him. The way his shoulders eased, just slightly, told her this place would hold him for now. The first days were marked by quiet rhythms. Jake mended the garden fence where the boards had loosened in the wind. He fixed a hinge on the gate. Evelyn brought over more supplies, blankets, fresh milk, small things for the twins. She stayed longer each time, though she never announced she was coming. One morning, she arrived to find him reading from a thin, battered paperback. The twins lay side by side on a quilt on the floor, watching his face as he spoke. His voice had lost some of its gravel since she first met him, still low, but easier somehow. "You read to them?" she asked. "Doesn't matter if they understand the words. It's the sound." She wanted to tell him she used to do the same, sitting in a rocking chair with her son pressed against her chest. But the words caught, so she only nodded. That night, she stayed for supper. He'd made something simple, potatoes, onions, bits of leftover roast. They ate in companionable silence, the twins sleeping in the basket by the fire. Rain tapped against the windows in slow, steady rhythm. But the quiet didn't last. It began with a visit from social services, another check-in. The man who came this time was different. Younger, less patient. His eyes took in the worn furniture, the mismatched dishes, the fact that Jake still had so few possessions. "You've done well, but this isn't a long-term arrangement," he said, glancing toward the twins. "We'll need to reassess soon." Jake kept his voice even. "They're fine here." The man's gaze slid to Evelyn. "Are you his caseworker?" "No," she said before Jake could speak. "I'm the property owner, and I've chosen to let him stay here as long as needed." The man made a note on his clipboard. "We'll be in touch." When he left, Jake leaned against the counter, his hands braced on the edge. "They want to take them," he said quietly. Evelyn stepped closer, her hand almost touching his arm before she stopped herself. "Then we make sure they can't." The next day brought a different kind of intrusion. A figure lingered at the edge of the lane while Jake was in the garden. Tall, coat dark with rain, a hat pulled low over his face. When Jake looked up, the man turned away, disappearing into the trees. That evening, Evelyn noticed Jake kept checking the windows. When she asked, he only said, "Someone from before?" She didn't press, but she caught the way his jaw tightened whenever the wind moved through the trees outside. Days passed, the rain easing into sharp, cold sunlight. The twins grew stronger, holding their heads up longer, watching the firelight with wide eyes. Jake began carving small wooden animals for them during their naps, smoothing the edges with sandpaper until they fit perfectly in a baby's hand. One evening, Evelyn found him in the firelight, holding one of the carvings, an unfinished bird. He turned it over in his fingers, as if the motion steadied him. "Used to make these for my unit," he said quietly. "Something to hold on to." She didn't speak, but she sat down beside him, close enough that her shoulder brushed his. The warmth between them was unspoken, but was there, in the shared silences, the way they both glanced at the twins and then back to each other, as if testing the shape of something they weren't ready to name. Then, one night, it returned, the figure at the gate. Evelyn saw him from a window, a man standing too still in the rain, watching. She turned to tell Jake, but by the time he reached the door, the figure was gone. When Jake came back inside, his hair damp from the mist, he said nothing. But later, after the twins were asleep, she found a folded scrap of paper pinned to the inside of the gate, for words written in a hurried hand. "You can't hide forever." She slipped it into her pocket without telling him, her fingers curling around the damp paper like it might burn through her skin. Outside, the wind rose, carrying the smell of rain and something sharper, something that felt like the start of a storm they wouldn't be able to keep outside for long. The fog came first, thick and low, swallowing the lane in a pale, restless drift. Jake Callan stood at the edge of the porch, one hand curled around a chipped mug of coffee gone cold. He wasn't looking at the garden or the road. He was looking at the place where the trees broke and the lane disappeared into shadow. The twins were still asleep, their soft breathing carrying faintly through the open window. Inside, Evelyn moved quietly, her steps measured against the creak of the old floorboards. She had seen the way Jake's eyes kept going to the gate over the past days. She didn't need to ask why. The fog thinned as the sun lifted, but the morning stayed heavy. Jake was still on the porch when the sound came, a slow crunch of gravel, deliberate, like someone who wanted to be heard. A figure emerged from the fog, tall, shoulders narrow under a dark coat, wide-brimmed hat dripping with mist. He stopped a few paces from the gate. Jake set the mug down on the rail. "You're far from where you should be," he said, voice low but carrying. The man's pale eyes caught the light. "You didn't think I'd find you?" Inside, Evelyn had stepped to the window, unseen. She stayed in the shadows, listening. "I've got nothing for you," Jake said. "That's not what I heard," the man replied, his mouth twisting into something that wasn't a smile. "They're asking questions again. Someone's going to answer. You got the wrong door." The man's gaze flicked toward the cottage windows. "You've got a lot to lose this time." Jake stepped off the porch, the limp in his left leg more pronounced on the wet ground. "Leave." The man took a half step forward. The air between them felt taut, like a wire ready to snap. Evelyn's pulse thudded in her throat. She reached her phone on the counter and dialed the sheriff's number without looking away from the window. Jake's stance shifted, a fraction more weight on his good leg, his shoulders squared. The other man read it and smiled faintly, like he'd been hoping for this. But the sound of tires on gravel broke the stillness. The sheriff's truck pulled into the lane, 2 deputies stepping out. The man in the coat didn't fight. He didn't have to. He just stepped back, let the fog take him as the deputies closed in. When it was over, and the truck's taillights had disappeared down the road, Jake came back inside. His hair was damp, his jaw tight. "They'll come back," he said quietly. "Then we'll be ready," Evelyn replied. He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable passing between them. "You don't have to be part of this." "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "I do." Later, when social services came again, Evelyn didn't wait for Jake to answer their questions. She stood in the doorway, every inch of her presence deliberate. "These children are safe here," she said. "If you doubt that, you can speak to my lawyer. I'm listed as their legal sponsor." It wasn't entirely true yet, but it would be before the week was over. The twins woke just before sunset, fussing until Jake lifted them into his arms. Evelyn was by the fire, her hair loose from the rain, the light catching the green flecks in her eyes. "You should rest," she said. "Can't," he answered, but he smiled faintly as he said it. They sat together on the couch, the twins between them, their small hands curling into whatever they could reach. Jake's shirt, Evelyn's fingers. The fire cracked softly. The storm outside had passed, but the air still smelled of rain. Jake looked at her, really looked, like he had been circling around this moment for weeks without meaning to. "I didn't think I'd let anyone in again." Evelyn's gaze held his. "Neither did I." Something shifted then, not sudden, not sharp, just the quiet certainty of 2 people deciding, without saying aloud, that they would stay. The twins settled back to sleep, their breathing sinking away that made the whole room feel steadier. Jake's hand brushed hers, and this time neither of them moved away. Outside, the fog was lifting. The fields beyond the garden glistened under the last spill of light. Tomorrow would be clear. They sat there until the fire sank into embers, the 4 of them framed in the warm glow. No papers, no signatures, no promises spoken. Just the beginning of something that might hold. If this glimpse into Jake and Evelyn's journey stirred something in you, you'll find more stories here. Tales of found family, second chances, and the quiet moments that change everything. Subscribe because the next story might just be the one you carry with you.